Obollo town was alive every morning before the sun had even risen fully. The market was the center of that life. From the early hours, the sound of traders spread like music across the dusty streets. Women called out the prices of peppers, onions, and groundnuts. Bus conductors shouted destinations until their voices cracked. The smell of akara frying in oil mixed with roasted plantain and fresh bread. If you listened carefully, you could hear children laughing as they ran errands for their mothers, or the bleating of goats being dragged through the crowd. This market was where everyone gathered, not only to buy and sell, but to share stories, hear gossip, and see who was succeeding and who was struggling. In this noisy and colorful place, every trader had their way of attracting buyers. John, who sold chickens too, was loud and dramatic. He shouted until his voice nearly broke, slapping his chest and swearing his chickens were the fattest in the town. Peter, older and calmer, leaned on the trust of his old customers. He didn't shout much, but people who knew him always came back. Women often sang short songs to draw people to their stalls. Some joked, some begged, some even quarreled just to keep attention. But there was one man who never needed to do any of these things. His name was David. David's stall was not special. Just a wooden table with cages stacked on it, resting under a patched umbrella that had faded from years under the sun. Yet his stall was the busiest place in the market. His chickens were large, healthy-looking, and sold for less than what others could afford to charge. While John could spend hours begging one customer to buy 2 scrawny hens, David sold 10 in that same time, without raising his voice once. He never called out, never argued, never lowered himself to begging. He simply sat, smiling gently, and took his money. And the people came. They came with baskets, with cash, with urgency in their steps, as if they would miss something if they delayed. Each day, his stall was full in the morning, empty by evening, and yet full again the next day. At first, the other traders told themselves it was luck. Some thought David had found a good farm somewhere that others didn't know about. Maybe he had family in the poultry business. Maybe he simply worked harder. But as weeks became months, they could no longer explain what they were seeing. John, the loud seller, grew restless. How can one man take all the customers in the market, he grumbled every evening. Even if I reduce my price, they leave me and run to him. Is he the only one who knows how to sell chicken? Peter, who was older and slower to anger, gave a different warning. My friends, he said one afternoon under the mango tree where traders rested, watch this man closely. Chickens do not multiply from the air. Every day his cages are full, yet no one has seen him buy feed or chicks. This is not ordinary. The sellers laughed at first, but as their pockets grew lighter and David's grew heavier, their laughter faded. Grace, a young mother, bought from David almost every week. She liked how cheap his chickens were, and she often told her friends, he is polite, and his chickens last long in the pot. Even when I cook for visitors, they praise the taste. But inside her home, she was not so sure anymore. Her daughter, after eating David's chicken, began to talk in her sleep. At first, Grace ignored it, thinking children often muttered while dreaming. But the words became stranger. Sometimes the girl whispered in a tongue no one understood. Sometimes she laughed softly in her sleep, in a way that chilled Grace's blood. One evening, Grace's husband confronted her. Why do you keep buying from him? Cheap food is not always safe. I would rather you buy small from someone we know than plenty from a man whose source we cannot explain. Grace argued at first, but like many in Obollo, she found it hard to resist David's store. Money was tight, and his prices were too good to ignore. Elsewhere, Mr. Harris, a wealthy businessman in Obollo, was preparing for a grand party. He wanted to impress his guests, so he ordered 20 chickens from David. The meat was roasted, stewed, and fried in different dishes. The music played, drinks flowed, and laughter filled his compound. But before the night was over, several guests excused themselves. Some held their stomachs, some staggered as if drunk, though they had barely touched alcohol. By morning, the whispers had already spread, the chickens came from David. Yet the crowd at his store never disappeared. Some claimed the sickness was coincidence. Others said his chickens were simply the best they had ever tasted. A man even joked, "Even if he feeds us with charms, I will still buy, because my stomach is full and my pocket is saved." But not everyone laughed. In corners of the market, under mango trees, and inside beer parlors, gossip spread. A barber told his customers that he had heard David's chickens never rotted even when kept for days. A woman at the well said a friend bought a dead chicken from David, but when she opened her bag at home, the bird was alive and staring at her. Stories grew like weeds. Nobody knew which were true, but they added to the cloud of mystery surrounding him. Michael, a young mechanic with a workshop near the market, decided to investigate. He began to watch David closely. Each morning, David arrived with his baskets. Each evening, he left with cash. But never once did Michael see him buy chicks or carry feed. Never once did he see him bargain with suppliers. It was as if the chickens simply appeared. John's anger grew. One night, he followed David after the market closed. When he returned the next morning, his face was pale, his lips dry. He refused to speak of what he had seen. "I will never mention it," he muttered, shaking his head. From that day on, John avoided even walking past David's store. But the unease spread beyond the market. Grace found a feather floating in her soup pot even though she had cooked beef. That same night, her daughter whispered David's name in her sleep. Grace shared her fears with a neighbor, who shared it with another, and soon the whole town was talking. At night, people swore they heard chickens clucking near Michael's workshop long after the market had closed. Some said they saw shadows moving where no chickens should be. The stories reached the churches, the drinking joints, the elders' meetings. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had answers. The sellers could take no more. They gathered again under the mango tree. Their voices were heavy with frustration. "We must expose him," Peter said firmly. "This cannot continue. If we remain silent, one day we will regret it." So the plan was made. On the next market day, they would confront David publicly. When the day came, Obollo market was different. People came not with baskets, but with expectation. Children clung to their mothers' wrappers, men stood with folded arms, women whispered among themselves. All eyes were on David, who sat calm as always, smiling as if nothing had changed. John's voice broke the silence. "David," he shouted. "Tell us where you get your chickens. No man sells as you do unless there is something hidden." David looked at him, said nothing, then bent slowly and placed his basket on the ground. The crowd pressed closer. Inside, the chickens stirred, but their movement was wrong. Their clucking was heavy, drawn out, almost human. Then, without warning, the basket tipped. What rolled out were not chickens, but wooden carvings smeared with feathers and blood. The crowd screamed. Women fainted, children wailed, men stumbled backward. Some shouted to chase him away, others cried for the leaders to act. Michael pointed at the carvings and shouted, "This man is not just a seller. You have seen it with your own eyes." The leaders gathered quickly. Their decision was swift. David was banned from selling in Obollo market. His store was torn down, his baskets burned. But though the fire consumed his store, the memory of what they had seen that day was not so easily erased. Grace stopped buying from strangers. Mr. Harris admitted his greed had blinded him. John and the others returned to their trade, but with fear in their hearts. And so David's name lingered in Obollo. Parents used his story to warn their children. Elders told it as a lesson. Traders repeated it as a proverb: when a bargain is too sweet, wisdom is to step back. Because in Obollo town, they learned that not every chicken is meant for the pot, and not every smile is honest.